The low hum of chatter, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter, filled the dimly lit university bar. The air hung thick with the smell of stale beer and cheap perfume. Shen Nanaying sat nursing a glass of iced tea, her gaze fixed on the swirling condensation, a stark contrast to the boisterous energy around her. Her friends, a gaggle of finance majors, were engaged in a heated debate, their words slurring slightly with each passing round of drinks. "Come on, Nanaying, 100 yuan says you'll be back with Gu Jian by the end of the month," Xiao Wei, her roommate, declared, a mischievous glint in her eye. Nanaying's lips curled into a wry smile. They just don't understand, she thought, the familiar ache returning to her chest. It's not a game anymore. 200 says she dumps him for good this time, another friend, Lin Fong, chimed in, raising her glass in a mock toast. Nanaying watched the interplay of light and shadow on the amber liquid, her mind tracing the trajectory of her relationship with Gu Jian. The initial thrill, the stolen kisses in the library, the whispered promises all now tainted with a bitter aftertaste. The casual cruelty in his eyes the last time they met, the dismissive wave of his hand, echoed in her memory. No, there's no going back. The conversation around her escalated, the bets growing higher, fueled by alcohol and youthful bravado. "Let me share with you the feeling of kissing the school beauty," Gu Jian's voice, laced with arrogance, echoed in Nanaying's mind. "It turns out that the school beauty is nothing more than that. This bed is really boring. Why don't you raise the stakes?" He'd said it just last week, carelessly dismissing her, reducing their relationship to a conquest to be boasted about. The memory sent a shiver of disgust down her spine. She clenched her jaw, a flicker of anger igniting in her usually calm eyes. 1,000, she said, her voice cutting through the drunken chatter. Her friends turned to her, surprised by her sudden interjection. 1,000 yuan says I won't even speak to him again. The air around the table stilled. The light-hearted banter shifted, a subtle undercurrent of seriousness replacing the playful atmosphere. Lin Fong's eyes narrowed, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "Nanaying, are you sure?" "Absolutely," she replied, her voice firm, though inside, a sliver of doubt pricked at her. It wasn't just the money. It was a declaration, a commitment to severing ties, a way to prove to herself, and to them, that she was moving on. In fact, she continued, a daring plan forming in her mind, why don't we call him now? Put an end to all this speculation. A tense silence followed. Xiao Wei reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. "Are you serious?" "He won't answer. It's almost midnight." "Precisely," Nanaying replied, a hint of defiance in her tone. "Let's see if he even bothers to pick up a call from his school beauty anymore." The phone rang, each shrill tone amplifying the tension in the room. It went straight to voicemail. Nanaying felt a strange mix of relief and a hollow ache. It was over. Truly over. She looked at her friends, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Looks like I win." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Nanaying's mind remained preoccupied. The bar's noise faded into a muffled drone as she contemplated her future, the weight of her family's financial struggles pressing down on her. The marriage proposal from Lu Jinyan, a man she barely knew, felt like a lifeline, a pragmatic solution to a desperate situation. Is this what my life has become? A series of calculated moves? She sighed, pushing the thought away. No, I'm doing this for my family. For a better future. Days later, the opulent setting of the Jade Springs Resort provided a stark contrast to the dimly lit bar. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the lavishly decorated room. Nanaying stood by the window, gazing at the sprawling golf course below, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. The impending meeting with Lu Jinyan's mother felt like another transaction, another step in the carefully orchestrated plan. Nanaying, you look beautiful, Lu Jinyan's voice startled her. He stood by the doorway, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, the morning sun catching the subtle glint of his watch. Nanaying forced a smile. Thank you. He's observing me, she realized, a strange awareness tingling her skin. He's always observing. The meeting with Lu Daiqing was surprisingly pleasant. The older woman's initial skepticism melted away as they talked, replaced by a genuine warmth. Nanaying found herself relaxing, her initial apprehension fading. Lu Jinyan, throughout the meeting, remained mostly silent, his gaze fixed on her, a subtle smile playing on his lips. He seems happy, she thought, the realization surprising her. Later that evening, as they strolled along the resort's meticulously manicured gardens, Lu Jinyan broke the silence. Your father is a shrewd negotiator, he said, his voice laced with amusement. Nanaying's cheeks flushed. He knows. He knows this marriage is a business deal. It was his idea, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped, turning to face her. The playful mask he usually wore slipped away, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Nanaying, he said, his voice low and intense, I didn't agree to this marriage for the S2 project. Her heart skipped a beat. Then why? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because of you, he replied, his gaze holding hers. From the moment I met you, he paused, searching for the right words. I knew I had to have you in my life. The confession hung in the air, thick with unspoken emotions. Nanaying stared at him, her mind reeling. Hello's me. The thought felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the garden. Gu Jian. His face was contorted with anger, his eyes blazing with jealousy. Nanaying, he shouted, his voice laced with desperation. You can't do this. You're mine. The carefully constructed facade of calm shattered. The simmering tension, the unspoken feelings, the intricate web of lies and secrets, everything threatened to unravel in the cool night air. The chipped porcelain of the teacup warmed her palm, a stark contrast to the icy dread that was slowly creeping up her spine. Shen Nanaying sat perched on the worn armchair in the living room, the floral pattern of the upholstery faded with years of wear, much like the vibrancy of their family's fortune. The afternoon sunlight, filtering through the dusty windowpane, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, a poignant reminder of the neglect their once pristine home had suffered. She could hear the muffled murmur of her father's voice from the study, a low hum punctuated by occasional bursts of emphatic tones. Curiosity, or perhaps a premonition of impending doom, drew her closer to the closed door. She pressed her ear against the cool wood, the grain rough against her skin. Her father's voice, usually booming and authoritative, now held a desperate plea. 50 years oldies, I understand, but the S2 project, the words hit Nanaying like a physical blow. 50 years old. An image flashed in her mind, a pot-bellied man with thinning hair and a condescending smile. Was this her future? A sacrifice on the altar of their family's failing business? Her hand tightened around the teacup, her knuckles white. A bitter taste rose in her throat, choking her. She knew her father's desperation. The S2 project was their last hope. Failure meant ruin, meant losing everything they had ever worked for. But at what cost? He's willing toys, a generous dowry, the entire debt. Nanaying will be grateful, I assure you. Her father's words echoed in her ears, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile wall of her composure. Grateful? Was she supposed to be grateful for being sold off like a commodity? A pawn in a desperate game of financial survival? A wave of nausea washed over her. She stumbled back from the door, the teacup slipping from her grasp. It shattered on the floor, the sharp crack echoing the shattering of her hopes. The noise startled her father. The study door swung open, revealing Shindingwa, his face etched with worry and was it a flicker of guilt. He stared at the broken pieces on the floor, then at her, his eyes narrowed. "Nanaying. What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. She met his gaze, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. The carefully constructed facade of indifference crumbled. "I heard everything, father." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it hung heavy in the air. He flinched, as if struck. He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. Don't pretend you were discussing anything else. 50 years old, father. Is that the price of our family's survival?" He sighed, the weight of the world settling on his shoulders. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of weariness she had seen countless times in the past few months. "Nanaying, you don't understand. We have no other choice. The company is more important than your daughter's happiness." The words were out before she could stop them, raw and accusatory. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and exasperation. "Happiness? What happiness can you find in poverty, Nanaying? This marriage will secure your future. It will save us all." She laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "Save us? Or sell me?" He turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "Don't be dramatic, Nanaying. This is for the best." "For the best? The most important thing in Shindingwa's life is to sell this oil bottle of mine," she muttered under her breath, the words laced with bitterness. She looked at her father's back, her heart aching with a mixture of anger and despair. "If you knew that I broke up with Gu Jian, maybe he will let me marry the 50-year-old boss Chen." A silence descended upon the room, thick with unspoken accusations and regrets. The broken pieces of the teacup lay scattered on the floor, a stark metaphor for the fractured state of their family. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, deepening the sense of impending doom. Nanaying closed her eyes, her mind racing, searching for a way out, a way to escape this suffocating reality. But every path seemed to lead to a dead end. She felt trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage, offered security in exchange for freedom. The image of Lu Jinyan flashed through her mind. His cool, appraising gaze, his enigmatic smile. He was a lifeline, a dangerous gamble. But what choice did she have? Marrying him was a deal, a transaction. But it was a deal that offered her a sliver of control, a chance to shape her own destiny, even if it meant walking into the unknown. It was a risk, a dangerous game. But at that moment, it was the only game in town. The cafe buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of ceramic mugs a gentle percussion against the backdrop of soft jazz. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, painting dust motes dancing in the air a shimmering gold. Shen Nanaying stirred her latte, the subtle sweetness a stark contrast to the bitter taste in her mouth. She hadn't slept well, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her chest like a physical burden. Across from her sat a woman she barely knew, a former classmate of Gu Jian, her presence a flickering candle of hope in the suffocating darkness of her current predicament. Nanaying's fingers traced the rim of her cup, the smooth porcelain a small comfort against the tremors of anxiety that threatened to unravel her composure. She'd met this woman, Mei Lin, by chance, a fleeting encounter that had blossomed into this clandestine meeting. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, fluttered within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, Mei Lin held the key to unlocking the cage her life had become. "He always seemed intense," Mei Lin began, her voice hesitant, her gaze flitting around the cafe as if searching for eavesdroppers. Nanaying's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. "Your boyfriend Gu Jian. He always had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world." Nanaying's breath hitched. Meilin's words echoed her own experiences, a chilling reminder of Gu Jian's manipulative charm. He had woven a web of adoration, a suffocating embrace that had masked his true nature. She forced a tight smile, her lips feeling stiff and unnatural. He can be charming. Meilin's lips curled into a wry smile, a flicker of something akin to pity in her eyes. Charming, yes. But beneath the surface there's something else. Something darker. She paused, taking a sip of her tea, her eyes meeting Nanaying's with a knowing intensity. Your boyfriend looks serious, but he doesn't seem to be a good person behind his back. Gu Jian's mind with you is not pure. A cold dread seeped into Nanaying's bones, chilling her from the inside out. She'd suspected, had glimpsed flashes of cruelty beneath the veneer of affection, but hearing it articulated aloud, from someone else, solidified her fears into a terrifying certainty. The cafe, once a haven of warmth and light, now felt oppressive, the air thick with unspoken truths. Meilin's words continued, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile edifice of Nanaying's hope. She spoke of Gu Jian's gambling debts, his reckless spending, his manipulative tactics to extort money from his friends. She spoke of his casual disregard for others, his penchant for using people and discarding them like broken toys. Nanaying listened, her mind reeling, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. The unexplained absences, the veiled threats, the constant need for money, it all made sense now. He hadn't loved her, not truly. He'd seen her as a stepping stone, a means to an end. A wave of nausea washed over her, the latte churning in her stomach. She closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. This was it. This was the confirmation she both dreaded and desperately needed. Her escape from Gu Jian, her marriage to Lu Jinyan, it wasn't a choice anymore. It was a necessity. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the cafe's gentle murmur. Thank you for telling me. Meilin reached across the table, her hand covering Nanaying's. The gesture, small and unexpected, sent a ripple of warmth through Nanaying's chilled veins. Take care of yourself, Nanaying, Meilin said softly. You deserve better. Nanaying nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was making the right decision, no matter how difficult. Later, the opulence of the resort where she met Lu Jinyan felt surreal, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of her previous life. The manicured lawns, the sparkling pool, the hushed elegance of the lobby, it was a world away from the cramped apartment she shared with her parents, a world away from the suffocating presence of Gu Jian. Lu Jinyan, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, greeted her with a polite smile, his eyes holding a flicker of something unreadable. Nanaying returned the smile, a mask of composure hiding the turmoil within. This marriage, this calculated arrangement, was her lifeline. Everything is arranged, Lu Jinyan said, his voice smooth and controlled. The S2 project is secured. Your father is pleased. Nanaying nodded, the words echoing hollowly in her ears. Her father's pleasure, bought at the price of her freedom, felt like a bitter victory. As they walked towards the private dining room, Lu Jinyan paused, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. You seem different, he said, his voice low and almost hesitant. Nanaying's heart skipped a beat. He saw it, the change in her, the hardening of her resolve. I am different, she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I've made a decision. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. And what decision is that? To embrace this, she said, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. To make this work, for both of us. A slow smile spread across Lu Jinyan's face, transforming his features from cool indifference to something warmer, something genuine. Then let us begin, he said, his voice laced with a hint of something that sounded suspiciously like hope. The dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance, a dance of polite conversation and veiled meanings. Nanaying played her part, projecting an image of serene composure, while inside, her thoughts raced, a whirlwind of fear and anticipation. She felt Lu Jinyan's gaze on her, a silent question in his eyes. Later, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the moonlit ocean, the pretense finally crumbled. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Lu Jinyan said, his voice quiet, almost vulnerable. He seemed different, somehow. The carefully constructed mask of indifference had slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath. Nanaying turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's what I need," she replied, her voice raw with honesty. "And perhaps more than I expected." He took a step closer, his gaze searching hers. "Nanaying," he began, his voice husky with emotion. And in that moment, under the cloak of the night sky, with the vast ocean stretching before them, the carefully constructed walls between them began to crumble. He confessed his feelings, a torrent of words that echoed the unspoken desires in her own heart. And in the quiet intimacy of that moonlit balcony, Shen Nanaying found herself confessing her own burgeoning feelings, a fragile hope blooming in the desolate landscape of her carefully constructed life. The afternoon sunlight, filtered through the dusty windowpane of her small apartment, cast long shadows across the worn rug. Shen Nanaying watched Gu Jian pace, his agitation a tangible presence in the cramped space. His words, accusations of her coldness, her changed demeanor, bounced off her with a strange hollowness. Had he truly not seen this coming? Had he been so blinded by his own self-importance that he hadn't noticed the growing chasm between them? "It's not sudden, Jian," she thought, the words unspoken. "It's been a slow, agonizing erosion, each instance of your disregard chipping away at what we had. Nanaying, talk to me." Gu Jian finally stopped, his hands gripping her shoulders, his gaze desperate. "What's changed? We were good, weren't we?" The touch, once comforting, now felt like a constraint. She looked at him, really looked at him, the boy she had once believed held her future. Now, she saw only a stranger, draped in the remnants of a love she no longer recognized. "We were," she agreed, her voice soft but firm, "but we aren't anymore. It's over, Jian." His grip tightened, his knuckles white. "What? Over? Just like that?" Disbelief warred with anger in his eyes. He shook his head, a mirthless laugh escaping his lips. "Is this about that Lu Jinyan? Are you serious? Him? What's he offering you that I can't?" The question hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken resentments and bruised egos. Nanaying closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. This was the moment she had dreaded, the inevitable confrontation she had been putting off for weeks. He wouldn't understand, she realized, a pang of sadness resonating within her. He could never understand the weight of responsibility, the burden of a family on the brink of ruin. "It's not about what he offers," she began, each word carefully chosen, "it's about what I need. And what I need, Jian, is a clean break." The anger in his eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake, Nanaying. A huge mistake. You'll regret this." She felt a flicker of doubt, a momentary hesitation. But the image of her father's haggard face, the weight of his unspoken pleas, solidified her resolve. "Maybe," she conceded, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's a mistake I have to make." The ensuing silence stretched, taut and suffocating. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, turning the familiar room into something alien and unsettling. As the last vestiges of daylight faded, the apartment grew colder, mirroring the chill that had settled in her heart. Gu Jian's departure was a blur, a hurried exit punctuated by slammed doors and muttered curses. Nanaying stood there, amidst the ruins of a broken relationship, an unexpected emptiness settling over her. She felt strangely detached, as if watching her own life unfold from a distance. A persistent knock startled her. It was her father. He seemed unusually agitated, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He pressed a glass of juice into her hand, urging her to drink. "You look tired, Nanaing," he said, his voice laced with a false solicitude that grated on her nerves. "This will help." She took a hesitant sip, the sweetness cloying on her tongue. A strange drowsiness began to creep over her, her limbs feeling heavy, her thoughts blurring. Something's not right, she thought, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. She tried to speak, to question her father, but the words wouldn't come. The room tilted, the shadows swirling around her like phantom dancers. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her father's face, an unsettling mixture of guilt and relief etched upon it. She awoke in an unfamiliar room, disoriented and confused. The scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. A figure sat by her bedside, his features obscured by the dim light. As her vision cleared, she recognized Lu Jinyan. His gaze was fixed on her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. What happened?" she stammered, her voice raspy. He rose, his movements fluid and graceful, and poured her a glass of water. "Your father called. He said you weren't feeling well." A wave of nausea washed over her. The memory of her father's forced smile, the overly sweet juice, returned with chilling clarity. She understood. She had been a pawn in his desperate game. "He drugged me," she whispered, the words laced with bitterness. Lu Jinyan's expression darkened. "I know," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He tried to deliver you to Gujian. Said it was a parting gift." A cold dread gripped her heart. The implications of her father's actions, the depth of his desperation, were almost too much to bear. Tears welled up in her eyes, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and a profound sense of betrayal. Lu Jinyan sat beside her, his hand gently covering hers. "You're safe now," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You're with me." His words, simple yet profound, resonated within her, offering a strange comfort amidst the chaos. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, saw beyond the facade of the aloof businessman. She saw the concern in his eyes, the genuine care in his touch. Later, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, casting a warm glow across the room, she found herself nestled against him, his arms wrapped protectively around her. A phone rang, shattering the fragile peace. It was Gu Jian. Lu Jinyan answered, his voice cold and dismissive. "She's with me." A pause, then, "Break up." "What?" "You and Shen Nanaying broke up." Another pause, filled with an icy silence. "It's not a game, Gu Jian. She's done with you." "And yes," his voice hardened, "she's with me. Permanently." He hung up, turning back to Nanaying, a wry smile playing on his lips. He seemed surprised. Nanaying managed a weak smile. He thought it was all a bet, she confessed, her voice barely audible. Lu Jinyan's gaze softened. He brushed a stray strand of hair away from her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "It's not a bet, Nanaying," he said, his voice low and intense. "This. Us. It's real." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "It's always been real, for me." The confession hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. Nanaying's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She had entered into this arrangement with eyes wide open, aware of the risks, the compromises. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred, the calculated transaction transforming into something more. She looked at him, her own feelings, long suppressed, finally bubbling to the surface. "It's real for me too, Jean Yen," she whispered, the words a silent promise, a surrender to the undeniable pull between them. The future stretched before them, uncertain and daunting, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense of belonging, in the arms of the man who had become her unexpected sanctuary. The stale air of Shindingwa's office felt thick with the unspoken. Sunlight, fractured by the blinds, striped the polished mahogany table where Lu Jinyan sat, his posture relaxed yet radiating an unnerving stillness. Shen Nanaying sat beside her father, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the smooth leather of her portfolio a cool anchor in the suffocating tension. She could feel the weight of Lu Jinyan's gaze, a tangible pressure that prickled her skin. Shindingwa cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. "So, Mr. Lu, we've discussed the terms. The S2 project is yours, contingent upon," he trailed off, his eyes flicking to Nanaying, a glint of calculation in their depths. Nanaying's stomach twisted. This was it. The moment her future would be decided, bartered like a commodity in a high-stakes game. Lu Jinyan's gaze remained fixed on her. His dark eyes, usually alight with a playful glint, now held a certain intensity that made her breath catch. He leaned back, the subtle shift in his posture somehow amplifying his presence. "Boss Shen, what does that mean? What is Yi waiting for?" His voice, smooth as polished obsidian, held an undercurrent of steel. A muscle twitched in Shindingwa's jaw. "Mr. Lu, you know the situation. Our arrangement requires a certain level of discretion." Lu Jinyan's lips curved into a thin smile. "Discretion, indeed. But I prefer clarity in my business dealings, and this arrangement concerns more than just business, doesn't it?" His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Nanaying's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what he was asking. The price of his investment wasn't just financial, it was her. Shindingwa shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Lu, I assure you, my daughter understands the importance of this partnership. I want Shen Nanaying to sever ties with the Shen family completely." Lu Jinyan's words cut through the room, sharp and decisive. Nanaying's breath hitched. She had anticipated this, prepared herself for it, yet hearing the words spoken aloud, witnessing the transaction of her life unfolding before her eyes, sent a chilling tremor through her. A strange mix of fear and liberation warred within her. Fear of the unknown, of being truly alone, and liberation from the suffocating grasp of her family's expectations. Her father's face paled. "Mr. Lu, that's a rather extreme demand." "Is it?" Lu Jinyan's gaze finally shifted to Shindingwa, his eyes cold and assessing. "I'm offering you a lifeline, Boss Shen. A chance to salvage what's left of your empire. I believe my terms are reasonable." Nanaying felt a surge of defiance rise within her. This was her life, her future. She wouldn't be a silent pawn in their game. Before her father could utter another word, she spoke, her voice surprisingly steady. "I agree." The word echoed in the room, silencing the two men. Her father stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Lu Jinyan's expression remained unreadable, but she sensed a flicker of something in his depth: surprise, perhaps, or even admiration. Inside, a storm raged. This was it. The final, irrevocable break. She was cutting ties with the only family she'd ever known, stepping into a future shrouded in uncertainty. Yet, paradoxically, a sense of relief washed over her. This severance, this painful amputation, was also a liberation. Nanaying, her father's voice was laced with a mixture of shock and reproach. "Do you understand what you're saying?" "I do, father." Her voice was calm, resolute. She met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "This is my decision." The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Finally, Lu Jinyan spoke, his voice breaking the tension. "Then we have a deal." The relief that flooded her was unexpectedly potent. She had expected a gnawing sense of loss, a crippling fear. But what she felt was a strange sense of lightness, a lifting of a burden she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. The weight of expectation, the suffocating pressure to conform, it was gone. She was free. Later, on the sprawling terrace of a luxury resort overlooking the city, Nanaying stood alone, the cool evening breeze whispering against her skin. The city lights twinkled below, a vast, impersonal tapestry of shimmering jewels. The champagne flute in her hand felt cold and unfamiliar. The deal was done. The S2 project was secured, her family's business saved, and she was adrift. Lu Jinyan joined her, his presence announced only by the subtle shift in the air. He stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You surprised me back there," he said, his voice low and soft, a stark contrast to the steely tone he'd used in her father's office. She turned to him, a wry smile curving her lips. "Did I?" "You didn't hesitate." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the cityscape before returning to her. "Most people would cling to family, even if it's complicated. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to survive," she said softly, her gaze mirroring his, tracing the glittering expanse of lights. "And sometimes it's the only way to truly live." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and in that moment, the carefully constructed facade he usually wore seemed to crumble. She saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a raw honesty that made her heart skip a beat. "Nanaying," he began, his voice husky with emotion, Before he could finish, a figure emerged from the shadows, shattering the fragile intimacy of the moment. Gu Jian, her ex-boyfriend, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and possessiveness. "Nanaying. What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice laced with accusation. "You can't just throw your life away for this deal." Nanaying felt a wave of weariness wash over her. She didn't have the energy to deal with his drama, his misplaced sense of entitlement. Lu Jinyan stepped forward, placing himself between them, his body a solid, protective barrier. "Mr. Gu, I believe you're mistaken. This is between my wife and me." The word "wife" hung in the air, a stark reminder of the new reality. Nanaying looked at Lu Jinyan, her heart pounding a strange rhythm against her ribs. He was her husband, in name, in contract. But in that moment, looking into his eyes, she saw something more, something deeper. And in the echoing silence, she heard her own heart whisper a truth she hadn't dared to acknowledge before: she was falling in love with him. Lu Jinyan turned to her, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Nanaying," he said, his voice low and resonant, "I didn't marry you for a business deal." She stared at him, her mind reeling. "Then why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing against her cheek, sending a shiver down her spine. "Because I love you," he said, his voice filled with a depth of emotion that stole her breath away. And in that moment, amidst the glittering lights and the lingering shadows, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the uncertainties of the future, Nanaying knew. She wasn't adrift. She was home. The French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the sprawling resort. Below, the meticulously manicured lawn stretched towards the inky blackness of the South China Sea, dotted with the shimmering lights of private villas. The night air, heavy with the scent of jasmine and sea salt, drifted in, carrying with it the distant murmur of the waves. Nanaying wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of her dress cool against her skin. She hadn't expected Lu Jinyan to bring her here, to this opulent sanctuary hidden away from the prying eyes of the world. He had been strangely quiet during the drive, the usual playful banter replaced by a pensive silence that had unsettled her. He leaned against the railing, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his silhouette etched against the backdrop of the night sky. The city lights, a distant glimmer on the horizon, reflected in his dark eyes, making them seem unreadable. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he finally said, his voice a low rumble that resonated in the stillness of the night. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a strange tension radiating from him, a palpable energy that made her heart beat a little faster. Was this another game? Another test to gauge her reaction, her suitability? Her father's words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her situation. "This marriage is a business deal, Nanaing. Don't forget that." He turned to face her, the moonlight catching the sharp angles of his face. "I've been thinking," he began, then paused, as if searching for the right words. "About us." Her breath hitched in her throat. "Us? What about us? There is no us." "What about us?" she echoed, forcing a casual tone she didn't feel. A fleeting smile played on his lips. "This arrangement, it's not what I envisioned." Her mind raced. Was he going to call it off? Relief warred with a strange pang of disappointment, a feeling she couldn't quite decipher. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, the scent of his cologne, something subtly masculine and expensive, filling her senses. "I agreed to this marriage for the S2 project, yes. Your father made that abundantly clear." His voice was tinged with a hint of cynicism. "But," he paused again, his gaze holding hers, "there's more to it than that, isn't there?" She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. More to it? For him. She had convinced herself that his interest was purely strategic, a calculated move to secure a lucrative contract. The thought that he might feel something more, it was unsettling, dangerous. I don't understand," she stammered, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, sending a shiver down her spine. The touch was light, almost hesitant, yet it sparked a fire within her, a warmth that spread through her veins like liquid heat. "Nanaing," he murmured, his voice softer now, almost a caress. "Don't you see? So if I want more than just an agreed marriage," he stopped, his eyes searching hers, as if seeking permission to continue. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. She wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of denial, but something held her captive, something in his eyes, in the intensity of his gaze. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I agree," he whispered, the words barely audible. "What I want is more than an agreed marriage." He pulled back slightly, his eyes locking with hers, burning with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I'll wait until you accept me." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Accept him? Accept this feeling that was blossoming within her, a feeling she had fought so hard to suppress? She had built walls around her heart, protecting herself from the pain of vulnerability, from the risk of being hurt. But his words, his touch, they were chipping away at those walls, exposing the raw, tender emotions she had kept hidden for so long. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. "Lu Jinyan," she began, her voice choked with emotion. She wanted to tell him that it was impossible, that this marriage was a sham, a transaction. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, buried beneath layers of pragmatism and self-preservation, a different truth was emerging. She wanted him too. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. "Don't cry, Nanaing," he murmured, his voice laced with tenderness. "Give me time. Give us time." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, the warmth of his hands a comforting presence against her skin. She had entered this marriage with a clear objective, to save her family. But now, standing here in the embrace of this complex, enigmatic man, she realized that her objectives had shifted. She wanted more than just a contract. She wanted him. The crisp autumn air nipped at Shen Nanaying's cheeks as she hurried across the university quad, the fallen leaves crunching beneath her worn loafers. Gu Jian's words, sharp and accusatory, echoed in her mind. A marriage of convenience, Nanaying. Is that all I meant to you? She clenched her jaw, a familiar tightness settling in her chest. He hadn't understood. He couldn't understand the weight she carried, the responsibility she felt for her family's future, a future that had teetered precariously on the edge of ruin until Lu Jinyan's offer. It was a deal, yes, but one she had entered into with open eyes, with a pragmatism born from necessity. Love? That was a luxury she couldn't afford. Or so she told herself. The news of her marriage had spread through the university like wildfire, fueled by whispers and speculation. The curious stares, the hushed conversations, they were a constant reminder of the life she had chosen, a life irrevocably intertwined with Lu Jinyan's. He was a phantom presence in her daily life, a name whispered on the lips of strangers, a figure glimpsed in fleeting news articles. She knew so little about the man she was bound to, a man who inhabited a world of gleaming skyscrapers and hushed boardrooms, a world far removed from her modest student existence. At Lu Jinyan's company, a sleek glass and steel monolith that pierced the city skyline, the atmosphere was charged. The news of his marriage to a seemingly ordinary university student had sent ripples of shock and confusion through the ranks. Whispers followed him down the sterile hallways, each hushed conversation a testament to the disruption he had caused. He was accustomed to the scrutiny, the constant speculation about his motives. But this was different. This was about Nanaying. His fingers drummed against the cool glass of his office window, his gaze lost in the city sprawl below. He had anticipated the fallout, the whispers, the veiled threats. But he hadn't anticipated the fierce protectiveness that surged within him, the primal urge to shield Nanaying from the storm he had unleashed. That evening, at a charity gala shimmering with opulent gowns and forced smiles, Lu Jinyan moved through the crowd with an effortless grace that belied the turmoil churning beneath the surface. He felt Nanaying's gaze across the crowded room, a silent acknowledgement amidst the cacophony of polite conversation. He saw the subtle tightening of her jaw, the flicker of unease in her eyes as Gu Jian approached her, his face a mask of wounded pride. Lu Jinyan's hand instinctively tightened around his champagne flute, a surge of possessiveness, raw and unexpected, coursing through him. He knew he shouldn't interfere, that Nanaying needed to navigate this on her own. But the thought of Gu Jian's words poisoning her against him, of driving a wedge between them, was unbearable. Why, Nanaying? Gu Jian's voice was laced with a bitter desperation. He can offer you wealth, security, but can he offer you love? Nanaying's heart constricted. Love. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken longing and regret. She looked at Gu Jian, at the familiar contours of his face, the earnest plea in his eyes, and a pang of sadness resonated within her. There was a time when she had believed in their future, a future filled with simple joys and shared dreams. But that future had crumbled beneath the weight of her family's misfortune, leaving behind a residue of regret and what-ifs. Love isn't always enough, Jian, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She knew they weren't entirely true. A part of her, a small, rebellious part, yearned for the kind of love that defied logic, that transcended circumstance. But that part was buried deep beneath layers of pragmatism and responsibility. Lu Jinyan watched the exchange from afar, his expression unreadable. He heard the desperation in Gu Jian's voice, saw the flicker of uncertainty in Nanaying's eyes, and a cold knot formed in his stomach. He had entered into this arrangement with the understanding that it was a transaction, a mutually beneficial agreement. But as he watched Nanaying, as he witnessed her quiet strength and her unwavering resolve, something shifted within him. The lines between business and personal, between calculation and emotion, began to blur. Later that night, as he drove Nanaing back to her university dormitory, the silence in the car was thick with unspoken words. The city lights blurred past the window, casting fleeting shadows across their faces. "Thank you," Nanaing finally said, her voice barely audible. "For everything." He glanced at her, his gaze lingering on her profile, the delicate curve of her jaw, the faint tremor of her lips. "You don't need to thank me, Nanaing," he replied, his voice low and husky. He wanted to say more, to tell her that he understood, that he admired her strength, that he cared. But the words caught in his throat, trapped by a lifetime of guarded emotions and unspoken truths. He pulled up outside her dormitory, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. As she reached for the door handle, he placed his hand over hers, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her veins. "Nanaing," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "stay." She turned to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise. He saw the flicker of uncertainty, the conflict raging within her. He saw the reflection of his own desire in her gaze, a desire that had crept upon him unawares, transforming a calculated arrangement into something far more profound. "Why?" she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. He leaned closer, his gaze holding hers, the city lights painting their faces in a kaleidoscope of colors. "Because," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and luminous. Nanaing's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She wanted to believe him, to embrace the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. But fear, a deep-seated fear of vulnerability and heartbreak, held her captive. "Don't say things you don't mean, Lu Jinyan," she whispered, her voice trembling. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "I mean every word," he said, his voice laced with a sincerity that pierced through her defenses. "Stay with me, Nanaing. Choose me." And in that moment, as she looked into his eyes, she saw a future that was no longer defined by duty or obligation, but by the promise of something real, something profound. She saw a future with Lu Jinyan. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I choose you." Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted the expansive villa in hues of gold and ivory. Shen Nanaing stirred, the unfamiliar softness of the silk sheets a stark contrast to the worn cotton of her own bed. The events of the previous evening, the tense dinner with her father and Lu Jinyan's mother, the strained smiles and veiled barbs, played like a flickering film reel behind her eyelids. She hadn't slept well, the weight of her family's future pressing down on her like a physical burden. A sigh escaped her lips, barely a whisper against the quiet opulence of the room. Turning, she found the other side of the bed empty. A faint indentation on the pillow remained, a ghostly reminder of Lu Jinyan's presence. Had he already left? The thought pricked at her, a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Their marriage, a meticulously crafted contract, felt increasingly real with each passing day, the lines blurring between performance and genuine connection. She told herself it was the circumstances, the shared secrets and vulnerabilities, that forged this unexpected bond. Yet, a small, insistent voice within questioned if it was truly just that. The sound of footsteps on the polished marble floor drew her attention. Lu Jinyan appeared in the doorway, a tray laden with breakfast in his hands. His crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealed the strong lines of his forearms. A simple gesture, yet it sent a ripple of awareness through her. He offered a small, almost hesitant smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the still air. "Good morning," she replied, her voice a little rough from sleep. She sat up, pulling the sheet higher around her chest, a nervous habit she hadn't realized she still possessed. He set the tray on the bedside table, the delicate china clinking softly against the wood. Steam curled from the porcelain cups, carrying the scent of jasmine tea. He poured her a cup, the movement precise and elegant, a subtle display of control that she'd come to associate with him. "Sleep well?" he asked, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. She looked away, focusing on the intricate pattern of the china. "As well as I could," she murmured, the words tinged with a bitterness she couldn't quite suppress. He didn't press her, instead handing her the cup of tea. The warmth seeped through her fingers, a small comfort in the face of the uncertainty that lay ahead. As they ate, a silence fell between them, thick with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Nanaying could feel his gaze on her, a tangible weight that made her skin tingle. She wanted to ask him about the S2 project, the reason behind their carefully constructed charade of a marriage, but the words wouldn't come. What was the point? The contract was signed, the deal sealed. Their lives were intertwined, regardless of the underlying motivations. He finished his breakfast first, setting his cup down with a quiet click. Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. Nanaying's breath caught in her throat. The air thickened with anticipation, a strange mixture of dread and excitement swirling within her. He opened the box, revealing a ring. Not the ostentatious diamond she might have expected, but a delicate band of platinum, inlaid with a single, perfect sapphire. It shimmered in the morning light, catching the blue of his eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the silence of the room. He took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. His fingers traced the lines of her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "Marry me," he said, his voice low and husky, barely above a whisper. Her mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. The contract, the marriage, it was all a business arrangement. A means to an end. Yet, looking into his eyes, she saw a depth of emotion that contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. This isn't," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "This is what I want to give you," he interrupted, his voice firm now, leaving no room for doubt. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I like you, Nanaying," he said, the words hanging in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "I like you," he repeated, his gaze intense, searching hers for a response. A wave of emotion washed over her, so powerful it threatened to drown her. Relief, confusion, and a burgeoning hope she hadn't dared to acknowledge before. The carefully constructed walls she built around her heart began to crumble, brick by painstaking brick. The pragmatic, rational part of her mind screamed at her to pull away, to remind him of the terms of their agreement. But another part, a part she had long suppressed, yearned to believe him. To believe in the possibility of something real, something beyond the calculated transaction that had brought them together. She looked at the ring on her finger, the sapphire shimmering like a captured teardrop. A single tear escaped her own eye, tracing a path down her cheek. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, his gaze was still on her, unwavering, filled with a tenderness she hadn't seen before. She began, her voice barely a whisper, the words hung in the air, unspoken, yet somehow, in the silence, he understood.